Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Weekend's here. Aliana's here. Good morning, Aliana. Good morning, Tika again. Good morning, Sabrina. Mashid is here. Good morning, Mashid again. And good morning, Casey again. Manish is here. Hello, Manish. Hello, Karen. Hello, Ying. Um, who else? Cindy's here. Good morning, Cindy. Who else? Who else? Who else? That might be all of us. Um, so while we're waiting for a few more people to hop in here, um, I think we'll probably be able to finish talking about India today, um, which again is kind of hello Jimmy, which is a little bit sad because I'm kind of enjoying it, but I think it's really interesting. But of course, we'll have to move on and deal with China next week. So we'll be able to finish that off today. Um, as a bit of a heads up, I think we should do a quiz on Monday as well. So we'll do a quiz on India on Monday. Um, so I'll put that into Microsoft Teams a little bit later so that you can so it's easy to remember. But I think we should do that on Monday. Um, same kind of deal as last time. One or two questions on India. Um, okay, let's jump into it, right? Let's not burn any time here. So yesterday I asked you to read this section on how Buddhism and Hinduism sort of evolve and change through as we're coming out of the Vedic age. Hello, Pearly. And what we said yesterday was that um, for Buddhism, anyway, it did gain in popularity after the Buddha's death, and it was attractive to people for a number of reasons. And we said one of them was that it was kind of an equal opportunity religion, right? You didn't have to be part of the upper classes, right? You didn't have to be in sort of a kshatriya or a Brahmin varna in order to sort of gain reward from this spiritual path, right? Anyone could follow the path, and anyone could become enlightened at any point in their life, and regardless of what varna or social class you kind of belong to. So it was kind of attractive for that reason, but it was also attractive because as these little Buddhist monasteries started to appear, um, kings would support them because it would contribute to their karma, right? Because these Buddhist monks sort of did good things for the community around them. And so if you supported the people who were doing good, then you were doing good as well. And so lots of people not only became Buddhist and kind of followed the path of the Buddha, but Buddhism was supported because it was kind of it was a public good, and people could kind of attain good karma for supporting these monks. So again, after the Buddha died, it actually did gain in popularity. We said that there were two kind of versions, two branches that came out of Buddhism, Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. And the Theravada Buddhism was a little closer to the version 1.0 of Buddhism, if you will. It was sort of more closely aligned with just what the Buddha taught and the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, whereas Mahayana Buddhism kind of developed into something a little more complex. There were kind of multiple realms, there were multiple Buddhas. Some people were bodhisattvas who voluntarily chose not to become enlightened so they could continue to help other people around them. And in some cases, the Buddha himself was worshipped. And so Mahayana Buddhism sort of evolved down a different path than, hello, Michael, evolved down a different path than sort of maybe the more traditional form of Buddhism. With regard to Hinduism, we said that it continued to develop as more writings, more written sources were added to this sort of Vedic Brahmanism tradition, and it sort of evolved into what we know as Hinduism. And so we were talking about yesterday these Dharma scriptures, and these were kind of written documents that kind of help to define what rules each person should follow to contribute to a good society. So what was your role? What was your duty as a person in Indian society? And so we talked a little bit about what how life was supposed to be structured for men. And again, this is a bit of a generalization because depending on your caste and depending on your varna, your roles would be different, right? But we said that men went through stages of kind of being a student and learning their occupation, to being a householder and raising a family and contributing to the community. And then eventually, when that was done, men were sort of expected to withdraw from society and sort of, good morning, Adelbert, withdraw from society and sort of become, follow a more religious path, right? Whereas for women, the picture was a little bit different, right? They were expected to obey and support their father in their youth, obey and support their husband once they were married, and sort of give birth to and raise children, right? So they have kind of a very quote unquote traditional role that is very, they play a very supportive role in Indian society, whereas men are the ones with sort of the power and the agency and the responsibility, right? We met a couple of important Hindu gods yesterday. We met Vishnu here, and Vishnu is kind of the preserver of the universe, right? Good morning, Min. Whoops. One of the things about Hindu gods is that they can, hello Sam, they can appear in different avatars, so they can appear in different forms. And so we see Vishnu appear in lots of different stories, written stories within the sort of Hindu tradition. And so Vishnu kind of preserves the universe and watches over it. Whereas Shiva here, which is another critically important Hindu god, is seen as a destroyer of things. And so this might sound bad, but I think it's not in the Hindu tradition. I think that the destroyer is not necessarily a bad guy, because in some cases things need to be destroyed in order to be reborn. And so I don't think Shiva is seen as a negative god or a negative character here. Shiva is just one part of the natural order of the universe, right? And so Vishnu preserves the universe, Shiva destroys the universe at the end of each cycle, and Brahma here creates it again. And so these three gods, Vishnu and Shiva and Brahma, are all part of this kind of cyclical destruction and rebirth of the universe. And so of the three of them, nobody's the good guy and nobody's the bad guy. They're just all part of the way that the universe works. And of course, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma are just three of many, many Hindu gods, which of course we would have to spend the rest of the course going through them all, but we won't do that. There are others that are very prominent and very important as well, like Ganesha, but we'll stick with just three. That's enough for us. So these three here, these three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, are different facets of the way the universe operates, right? The way that the universe continues to work. Okay, so very quickly, during this period, during this sort of later Vedic age, or during kind of the Mauryan Empire, we see Hinduism kind of created out of a number of different things. And so it's based on the sacrificial religion of the Brahmins. And of course, remember that went all the way back to the Rig Veda and the arrival of the Indo-Aryans in northern India around 1700 BC. So this very old religion serves as the basis for Hinduism. But then we also have these other ideas and traditions woven into Hinduism as well. So the spiritual pursuit of the self and an understanding of divine reality that some of these gurus and ascetics were writing about in the Upanishads. We have this social order of the Varna and the caste system that comes about in the Vedic age, and it gets woven into Hinduism. And so the social order takes on a religious connotation, a religious function. We have ideas about law and order, but also about what each person's duty in their family and in society is, written in the Dharma scriptures. And then, of course, we have a number of different gods appearing to and that have to be worshipped. And of course, we've talked about Vishnu and Shiva and Brahma as some of the more important ones. Yeah, so Hinduism then, for the people who practice it, significantly shapes the social and political and spiritual life of the people in India, right? Because there are all different parts of your life are wrapped up in your religion, right? In terms of your occupation, your what part of your life you're in and what you're supposed to do, your spiritual development, your worship of the gods. All of those things are kind of who you might marry is tied to the Varna and the caste system. All of those things are kind of connected together within Hinduism. And so as a Hindu, kind of every part of your life is touched by your religion or is patterned by it. And so, again, the rulers of India are no different, right? Every part of their job is tied up in Hinduism and the sort of ideas that, yeah, it's part of their way of life. Yeah. So Indian rulers continue to go about their lives and sort of rule their territory based on supporting the Brahmins, following the writings that have been created, declaring their devotion to supreme deities. I'm going to sneeze in a second here. Hang on. Okay, I'm back. Whew, okay. Yeah, and basically the king had to fulfill his dharma as well, right? The king has to fulfill his roles in society just like everyone else does, right? Everyone has responsibilities and duties, and the king, of course, is no different. Okay, that brings us to this section here. And so what I had asked you to do, and I'm curious to see what you came up with, what I had asked you to do is look at these categories and think of the most important things that we learned, from each category. And so let's start with culture and environment. So culture and environment, what are some of the most important things we learned about the way that Indian culture or Indian cultural development is connected to the environment? Or just things about the environment. What did we learn? What did we hear about? So Aliana says, okay, that's definitely about the culture, right? So we have a belief in Dharma about the sort of natural order of things, but we also have Buddhism appearing. Okay. Let's see. We have different languages and live and move on diverse terrain suited to many different types of livelihood. That's good, Cindy. Yeah. So there's different types of languages that appear in India, right? Sanskrit appears to be one of the older ones, but Sanskrit will evolve and sort of give birth to other languages that are still spoken today, like Hindi and Punjabi and Bengali and Urdu and many others. KC says they perform chants that part of those Brahmin chants are very early, and they're in no pieces of them are in no known language. So that speaks to how old they are and how long they've been passed down. They've been passed down so long that the language around them has changed, right? What else? What else did you say for that one? Admittedly, we didn't talk very much about the physical environment, so the geographical environment in India. I know it played a role in Mesopotamia, and it plays a big role in Egypt. We didn't talk too much about it in this unit. Influences how one takes care of the environment shows how they take care of people. Okay, yeah, I guess we could say that if we heard about that very recently in connection with Jainism, right? So the idea of nonviolence and treating animals in a non-cruel way, because that shows how, or the way you treat animals is the way you treat people, right? And so if you connect animals with the natural environment, yeah, that will work. Karen also says some parts of India, because no one understands the writing today, and a mix of ancient and modern ideas. Okay. So, yeah, there are certain things that are still not understood. I'm not sure about the writing. I know that, Sanskrit we can read, obviously, and then there was the Brahmini script that, why can I never remember his name? I can't remember his name, but we saw him. That was how we learned about Ashoka, and so that script was deciphered. There might be others that we don't know how to read currently, but we could definitely say that India is currently a mix of ancient and modern ideas. And actually, that's a good one, Karen. I wanted to point that out. I'll just put, Sarvesh, you're right. Yeah, Hinduism is practiced differently in different parts of India. Yeah, so India is a big place. There are currently hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, there are millions and millions and millions of people in India. And so, yeah, they are a diverse group of people linguistically, culturally, and religiously, right, even today. Yeah, with your comment here, Karen, I wanted to say one of the things that's super intriguing about India is that there is continuity all the way back from thousands of years ago. So if you look at Mesopotamia today, people don't worship Shamash, right? People don't worship Inanna, right? They don't worship these gods, these Sumerian gods from thousands of years ago. We know about the Epic of Gilgamesh, but people don't really pass it down in that way. The same thing in ancient Egypt. People don't worship Osiris and Isis and Horus anymore, right? There's been kind of a cultural and religious break in terms of what Egypt was thousands of years ago, and of course what Egypt is today, right? A lot has changed. But here in India, we see that there's actually a line of continuity where some of these gods like Vishnu and Shiva, some of these ideas that are found in the Rig Veda, they go back thousands of years in in kind of an unbroken line. And so unlike the Sumerian religion or the Akkadian religion, unlike the Egyptian religion, Hinduism is still, and Buddhism and Jainism, they are all living religions. They're living traditions that people still adhere to today. And that's kind of one of the things that makes India really interesting and intriguing, but also different from the other cultures that we've studied so far, is that it is still in practice, some of these ideas. Okay. What did you say for this one? What did you say for things about politics, ideas about power or authority or governance? What did we learn in association with that? So Cindy says, Right. In earlier times, society was organized as a fluid three-class social structure with priests and warriors and commoners. Yeah. So the social structure thousands of years ago was quite a bit simpler, and it was fluid, meaning that you could kind of move between different things. You could be a commoner and then become a warrior, or vice versa, right? Um, so yeah, so that was true kind of in the early Vedic period. That's where we started out, so that's good. Um, they currently are governed by a prime minister, right? Narendra Modi is the current prime minister of India. That's true. Karen says, yeah, they have a caste system. Caste system has been in existence with Brahmins at the top of the power. Yep. Later, Buddhist values gave men even more power over women. Yes and no. So Cindy's right here. We start out with a very kind of simple, fluid social structure, right, with priests and warriors and commoners. But you're right, Karen. Things will develop into a much more complicated social system, the caste and the Varna system, but also one that's less fluid, and so it's more rigid. And so the thing about Varnas and castes is that there's usually no way out of them, right? So if you're born a Vaishya, that's where you'll be for your entire life. There's no way to work hard and become a kshatriya. You can't really do that. There's no way to marry a kshatriya and then you'll get out of your Varna. That doesn't happen either. And so we start out with a social structure that's very fluid, and we eventually get to one that's actually very rigid, and there's hard boundaries between those different Varnas and those different castes, right? I think the ideas about men having power over women, part of that has to do, Karen, and we haven't talked about this very much, part of that has to do with agriculture and the fact that in agricultural societies, men tend to control food and production, and women tend to be in the home raising children. So part of that inequality comes from there. Part of it seems to come from these Dharma scriptures. And so those Dharma scriptures start to lay out what men should do and what women should do. And because they are religious texts, people tend to adhere to them strongly. And so I think it's the Dharma scriptures that are associated with Hinduism that are more responsible for that inequality between men and women. But don't quote me on that. I'm still new to India's history and the history of Hinduism. So that's my understanding at the moment. But don't, if I'm wrong, don't kill me over that. Indians look up to the Buddha. Yeah, some of them do, and some of them definitely did at the time following his death. Right there, lots of people chose to pursue that path and look up to the Buddha. Right. Chandragupta Maurya, founded the Mauryan Empire, and his grandson later made sure Dharma was the law of conduct and helped spread Buddhism in the empire. Yeah, that's very true. So Chandragupta Maurya kind of created the first Indian empire, and it was the sort of shape and size of it was roughly the same as the modern state of India today. So it's kind of it's an early stage in history where India is what we think of it today. And Chandragupta Maurya creates this, and his son takes over, whose name I can't remember, and of course his grandson is Ashoka, who governs the empire in a very different way, right? He uses dharma and non-violence to encourage people to behave and do what he wants them to do, which seems to have worked, right? What about ways in which India has interacted with or been in exchange with other cultures? What do you think about that? because India did interact with a couple of other cultures that we heard about. What did you say for that one? Oh, hello, Lim. Yeah, trading system. Yeah, so who did they trade with? Who did we have evidence of Indian civilizations trading with? Let's see. Okay. So a few things here. So one could not ascend in the caste system to a better rank. So that's very true. I guess you could put that under the category of interactions within society, Karen. So that would work. And one could not marry out of their social class. That's also true. Yeah, they did trade with their neighbors. And if you recall, well, I'll see if anyone comes up with it. But yeah, they did have interactions with Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Great conquered his way from Macedonia, which is north of Greece, all the way down almost into India before his generals stop. And once Alexander dies, there's a little conflict between Chandragupta Maurya and Seleucus, who's one of Alexander's generals. They have a little bit of a conflict. They work it out. They sign a peace treaty, right? And so after that, there is just kind of a diplomatic relationship between the Mauryan Empire and the Seleucid Empire. Yeah, one of the things they're definitely trading are spices, right? There's a very lucrative spice trade that will come out of this period, and lots of spices that will come out of India and make their way into the rest of the world, really for hundreds of years after that. The other thing you might mention, or you might remember, and this is a ways back, but you might remember that the Indus River Valley civilizations, so the first civilization in India that started around 2600 BCE, that civilization was trading with the Mesopotamians, right? We found Indus River Valley seals, things that you kind of stamp into clay. We've actually found those in Mesopotamia. And so those two civilizations, those two cultures were trading over thousands of kilometers of space, right? And they were doing that for 4,000 years ago or so. It was very impressive. Interactions and exchanges. I think I've got a little bit more for that, but let's no, did we learn anything about is it the Silk Road? Silk Road comes a little bit later, Sarvesh. The Silk Road is I think that's toward the later Middle Ages. Oof, the Middle Ages is not my historical strong point. So I think that's closer to the Middle Ages, but again, don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. I think that comes a little bit later, though. Maybe. Okay, conflicts and conflict resolution. Did we learn anything about that, or did we learn anything about that with regard to India? Conflicts and conflict resolution. Maybe not. Maybe not. I guess you could mention, for conflicts, I guess you could mention the conflict between Seleucus and Chandragupta Maurya, right? That was a bit of a battle. You could mention Ashoka's conquering of Kalinga, in which he sees all of the death and destruction and is appalled, and he decides to rule based on non-violence after that. I think those are the main conflicts we see. What does Karen say? Karen says kings were ruthless to enemies and occasionally waged war with them. Yes. There were wars with Greece, but then they were settled. Yes, that's true. So yeah, the Mauryan Empire's conflict with excuse me, Alexander's generals are concluded with a peace treaty. Aliana said the higher authority is the one who solves it. Yeah, that's often the case in societies like this. Although, should I say that? I'll leave it. Okay, last one. This there should be more for this one, I think. Values and beliefs. What kind of values and beliefs do we learn about in India? And there should be lots of these, because we wound up talking a lot about religious and spiritual ideas and religious and spiritual practice, and so there should be lots of stuff here. So what are some of the things that we encountered in terms of values and beliefs? Things people believe, or things that they value, things that they think are important? Okay, so Cindy says a few things here. Cindy says, the Brahmins were the purest and most honored. Yes, so in the traditional Varna system, that's true. The Brahmins were at the top of that social structure. Yeah, we learned about Hinduism and Buddhism, two major religious traditions that have survived the test of time and are still practiced by people today, which is very remarkable. They had a sacred drink that they used to enlighten their senses, right? It was called soma, and it was they mention it in the Rig Veda thousands of years ago. Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, they were the Hinduism is polytheistic, and so there's many gods, right? There's more than one god. Buddhism and Jainism comes in a little bit later, yes, and many people believe that enlightenment could be achieved by meditation and detachment from earthly desires and not from praying to the gods. Yeah, all of those things are true, right? We have polytheistic Hinduism, but we have Buddhism and Jainism, where both of those spiritual traditions are trying to liberate the soul from this constant cycle of death and rebirth, right? Buddhism doesn't care about one's social class, and so it attracted people. Yeah, it was very equal opportunity. The teaching of the religions influenced how men and women carry themselves in society and their roles. Yes. So actually all three religions did that, Karen. You're right. Hinduism had those Dharma scriptures, which laid out what men and women should do and how they should behave. But if you recall, the Buddhists and the Jains had ideas about how people should behave too. And those didn't necessarily differ between men and women, but they did have ideas about how you should conduct yourself in society, right? Right speech, right thought, right behavior, all of those things, right? So all of those traditions have some sort of ideas about how you should behave, what kind of a person you should be, right? Good. Yeah, so there's a lot of spirituality that we learn about here, right? And the pursuit of truth. And that's really interesting, but maybe we'll get to that in a second. Um, what other things do we hear about here? Values and beliefs that we've learned about in the course of studying India. Hmm. Okay. Well, here's what I here's what I thought. Some of I have some thoughts about some of these, some of which you've mentioned, maybe some of them you haven't. Um, but I'll just walk you through some of the things I was thinking. So, we didn't really talk about this at all, but I think it's worth saying that India is very diverse in terms of its. Um, sorry, there shouldn't be an apostrophe in that. That's grammatically incorrect. Um, Very diverse in terms of its geography and its climate, right? So we've got sort of cold, snowy mountain ranges in the north. We've got these wide river floodplains around the Indus River system and the Ganges River system. But we also have rainforest in a lot of India as well. Overall, India can be quite warm, but not all places are. We have these monsoons, these seasonal rains that come anytime between June and September. And so that's kind of the environmental context. We didn't really talk about that, but I thought I would put it in. Early on, we saw that the two river systems, the Indus and the Ganges, were used for agriculture, for intensive agriculture, right? And that led people to be able to grow pretty significant quantities of food. And if you remember, the development of iron tools and the domestication of rice helped to do that. And then as a result, we saw craft specialization, and we saw civilizations developing as well, right? In the Indus River Valley in about 2600 BCE, and then we saw development in the Ganges about 1,000 years later. We said that probably a change to the timing or the intensity of the monsoon might have led people to leave the Indus River Valley and move to the south and to the east, right? So people were living in the Indus River Valley, raising their crops, practicing intensive agriculture, but it seems the pattern of the rains may have shifted. They weren't able to water their crops, they weren't able to grow enough food, and so they had to move off into other areas, right? In terms of politics and power and authority, we heard that, or we talked about the idea that the Indus River Valley civilization seemed to have some sort of centralized authority, right? So someone was in charge of that civilization, but we don't really know much about who or how, because again, we weren't able to read their writing, and so we're not really sure what was going on in terms of government. Did they have a king? Did they have a priest king? Did they have a group of priests? We just don't know, right? We learned about the Vedic Aryans, and we saw that they had kind of a mix of different systems of authority, right? They had some tribal chiefs called Rajas. They had people that were at the head of clans. In some cases, they had kings. Some groups of Vedic Aryans operated as kind of an oligarchy, almost like a democratic republic sort of thing. Some of them had monarchies, so they had single leaders. So it was a bit of a mix. And later on in history, we saw that we had kings, or you might have wanted to call them emperors too, but we'll call them kings here. So people like Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, those guys were kings, right? We saw that in Ashoka's Mauryan Empire, the way that Ashoka ruled the empire was based on religious philosophy, right? Specifically, the philosophies of the Buddhists and the Jains, right? And so he was trying to rule his empire by persuasion, right? By appealing to people's sense of values and using a principle of nonviolence, right? You'll remember he also positioned himself as a father figure, right? He tried to describe himself as the father of the empire, and of course, everyone in the empire was his children. That of course is not the last time that will happen. Many leaders in the past and even in the present have tried to position themselves as either the father of the nation or as kind of like an uncle. And so I think you can probably all think of leaders of countries who have tried to describe themselves to the people as a father or as an uncle, right? So I'm thinking of Joseph Stalin has done that. I think Kim Jong-un has done that. Who else has been a father of the nation? Mao has tried to position himself that way. Xi Jinping has tried to sort of position himself as an uncle, right? As a sort of a paternal figure who looks out for the people. So the fact that Ashoka is doing it here thousands of years ago, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, tries to do that as well. So it's very common, and Ashoka tries to do it here. He tries to position himself as the father of the nation. Interactions and exchanges. We saw that the Indus River Valley was trading with the Mesopotamians that were thousands of miles away, thousands of years ago, which is pretty incredible. Also, in terms of interactions, we have the interaction of two different groups of people, right? So there are a group of Indian people living in India that seem to have connections to the first humans to kind of leave Africa and migrate out into the world. And so there's that group of people. And then there's those Indo-Aryans that move into northern India from Central Asia, right? From kind of Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, the Caucasus region. They sort of migrate down. And so Indian culture and civilization is created by kind of the combining of these two groups, right? The Indo-Aryans from the northwest and sort of the people who are already living in India at the time and who have been there for seemingly thousands and thousands of years. Yeah, in terms of conflicts, we see that the Mauryan Empire was interacting with the Greeks, which I think we mentioned, but they also had diplomatic connections with the Seleucids and the Greeks and the Egyptians. And so these cultures knew about each other. They were interacting with each other thousands of years ago. And finally, we have values and beliefs. And so from the Vedic Brahmins going back almost 4,000 years, we have the Rig Veda. We talked about the sky god Indra and some of the others. We got the Varna system from these Vedic Aryans. And also some texts that were later added to the Rig Veda, right? The Brahmanas and the Upanishads. Some of the concepts that will become important to Hinduism later on, and Buddhism and Jainism, are thought of by these Brahmins as well. So this idea of transmigration, right, of reincarnation, of dharma, of universal order and duty, of karma, the idea that if you do good things will come to you, you will become a good person. All of those come from those Vedic Brahmins very, very early on. We see the appearance of Buddhism about 2,500 years ago, and the Buddha comes up with 4 noble truths as a path to enlightenment. We said that Buddhism is interesting because it's transtheistic, and so it's super interesting because, again, knowledge isn't revealed by the God. The Buddha actually figures it out. And if you sort of do the work and you figure things out and you do the work on your own, you can achieve enlightenment, and you can do it without going through a God, right? And that's very different from Western religions like Christianity and Judaism and Islam, where salvation, where sort of entering into a paradise, you have to go through the God, right? You have to believe in the God and pray to the God. Buddhism, you can do it on your own, and so it's trans-theistic, right? The universe operates in a certain way, and gods are not super relevant. And the attainment of enlightenment, the attainment of nirvana, is an important thing as well. We learned a little bit about Jainism, right? In particular, ahimsa, which is an important principle for the empire of Ashoka, but also important for modern India as well, because that principle of nonviolence is used by Mahatma Gandhi to liberate India from the British, right? Nonviolence is a very important part of his strategy, and of course it works. The British leave India. And again, Jainism is trans-theistic as well, and so there is a greater universal order, greater than the gods. Hinduism we just talked about. Of course, it's polytheistic. There are lots of different gods, and these Dharma scriptures help to outline what everyone's responsibilities in society are, depending on your caste and your varna and your gender and your age. Okay. And that brings us to this section here. Okay? So what I'd like you to do, this is the last thing I'll ask you to do today, is just write me a short paragraph and email it to me. And the question I want you to answer is this: what aspect of what we've studied about India do you feel is most connected to your own life? Okay, and how is it connected? So we've talked about cultural interactions, we've talked about cultural continuities, we've talked about religion and spirituality and roles of men and women in society. We talked about all kinds of different things. And so what I would like to know is, which do you think, what about this unit in India has connected with you most directly? And how is it connected to you? It could be something, if you are a Buddhist, then, the study of Buddhism might be the thing that most connects you. Sorry, dog. If you're not, you might just find things about this unit that you thought were interesting or intriguing, or things you hadn't heard before. And so those things would work too. And so whatever you kind of feel is most connected to your own life in some way, I would be interested in hearing about. What if there is nothing? Well, this is the thing, is that one of the things that we want to take from this course is that even when we're looking at cultures and religions that are very different from our own, looking at one culture might be able to help us to better understand our own culture and our own society. And so there may be lessons that we can learn from another culture, either positive or negative. There may be things about another culture that are similar to our own in ways that maybe we hadn't thought about. There may be things from another culture that we might want to kind of borrow, right? Ideas or perspectives on things, or there might be some cautionary tales too, right? We might see things in other cultures that we think, okay, maybe that's not something that we would want to duplicate in our own culture for a certain reason, right? So there's all kinds of things that we can learn comparing our own lives and our own history to the lives and history of other people. Okay, so that's kind of one of the underlying themes of this course, is that even though we're looking at people in India, living thousands of years ago, living different lifestyles and practicing different religions and having different values and beliefs, there should be some commonalities. There should be some overlap. There should be some things that speak to us. There should be some things that speak to us, right? Think about the Dharma scriptures, for instance. So the Dharma scriptures kind of tell you what your duty or obligation in life is, depending on if you're a man or a woman, or if you're a member of a certain varna or caste. And I think we could say that we all have those ideas in our own cultures, right? All of us, I think, are aware of what we are supposed to do, right? When we grow up, things that we are supposed to become, certain things in our lives that we are supposed to do. And even if they're not written in a religious text, I think we have ideas about what should be done, right? And so how do those compare to the ideas that the Hindus have in the Dharma scriptures, for instance? How do our own religious ideas compare with the religious ideas of the Hindus or the Buddhists or the Jains? So there could be any number of things that you might connect with. And so it doesn't mean you have to necessarily agree with the beliefs and values and practices of another culture. You don't have to disagree with them either. They just have to kind of cause you to think about your own life and your own culture. And so again, it could be anything, right? It could be absolutely anything. Does that help you a little bit, Karen, or anyone else? Does that help you kind of understand what I might want there? Okay, good. So what I'll do is, so I posted this, the contents of this slide in Student Portal, so that you can do it and send it to me. The other thing I'd like to do is on Monday, I would like to do a quiz on India. Okay, so same thing as usual. We'll do, 1 or 2 questions on India. I will, let's do that. We'll definitely do that on Monday, Cindy. And I will, in Microsoft Teams as well, I'll post the class numbers, so the slides that we want to look at, and I'll post the order of who's going to be tested when, okay? So you'll know. When is it due? If you could send it to me by the end of the day, Aliana, that'd be okay. I'm going to end class here in about 2 or 3 minutes, and so you'll have the rest of the time to quickly type it out and send it to me. But maybe by the end of the day would be okay if you can. Okay. So I think that kind of does it for India. Does anyone have any questions or comments or things that they want to say before we break? Can you post the lesson on SPO class for me? Yes. If you mean the lecture slides, do you mean the lecture slides? What do you mean? Oh, it's on student. Can you post the lesson on Student Portal? Yes, they're all there except for, I've just put them there, Cindy. They're all there except for today's, and I'll put today's up there right now. Okay. Yes, so those will all be there. Sarvish is good. Everybody else okay? Oh, come on. You're making me blush. But thank you. Thank you. Okay. That's all I'll say. Send me your homework by the end of today. Pearly's good. That's awesome. Send me your little homework by the end of today if you can. I'll post the quiz particulars in Microsoft Teams, and we'll do that Monday. And other than that, everyone looks to be good. So that will do it for India, unfortunately. I hope everyone has a good weekend. Try to relax. Don't work too hard if you can avoid it. And yeah, and that's it. And I'll see you on Monday. Okay, so do your homework, study hard, and I'll see you Monday. So bye everyone.